Marcus Aurelius had a man in his court whose entire job was to whisper insults at him during public ceremonies. Not to humiliate him, to keep him honest. Because the Emperor of Rome understood something most men never figure out: your friends will lie to your face with a smile, but your enemies will accidentally tell you the truth. Your enemies see the version of you that your ego hides from yourself. Nietzsche wrote that we resent most in others what we secretly fear in ourselves, but the reverse is also true. Your enemy doesn't filter what they observe through loyalty or affection. When a rival at work calls you arrogant, your best friend says ignore him, you're great. But sit with the accusation for 5 minutes. Is there a 2% truth in it? Because that 2% is the real data. Abraham Lincoln famously kept his harshest critics, men like Edwin Stanton, who once called him a long-armed ape, inside his cabinet. When asked why, Lincoln said he needed men around him who weren't afraid to tell him he was wrong. Friendship operates on a social contract of mutual protection. Your friends protect your self-image because their own emotional comfort depends on yours. Your enemy has no such contract. They're watching you with cold, unfiltered eyes, and what they report back, even in the form of an attack, often contains signal buried in the noise. The patterns your enemies exploit are the same patterns holding you back. Think about the guy who keeps getting passed over for promotions. His friends tell him it's politics, bad luck, a biased manager. But then he gets a new job, same thing happens. Then another job. At some point, the common denominator isn't the company. It's him. His enemies, the ones who spread rumors, who undercut him in meetings, they found a crack in his armor. They always find the real crack. Schopenhauer argued that opposition reveals structure. A wall you can push against tells you more about its construction than a wall you never touch. Enemies are adversarial by nature, which means they run stress tests on you constantly. They probe for weakness, for inconsistency, for the gap between who you perform yourself to be and who you actually are. That's useful intelligence. The question is whether you're willing to collect it without letting the source of the intelligence destroy you emotionally. Criticism from enemies forces clarity that praise never can. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the parts of yourself you've buried because they didn't fit the image you wanted to project. Kind men who secretly carry rage. Confident men who are terrified of being exposed as frauds. The shadow doesn't disappear because you ignore it. It leaks. And the people most likely to point at the leak are the people who dislike you. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and spent his life studying meaning under pressure, wrote that a man who is challenged, truly challenged, either collapses or crystallizes. Most men never crystallize because they're never genuinely challenged. Their social circle is too comfortable, too validating. Praise is nutritionally empty. It feels good, but it doesn't build anything. Criticism, even unfair criticism, forces you to answer a question: is this true? That question, taken seriously, is one of the most productive cognitive processes available to you. You either prove it wrong by examining your behavior and finding the accusation doesn't hold, which builds real confidence, or you find it partially true and now you have a map to where you actually need to grow. Knowing your enemy's perception of you gives you strategic power over your own reputation. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that a leader must understand how he appears to those who wish him harm, because that appearance is the one he cannot control through charm or relationship. The rest of your reputation is managed through goodwill. But what your enemies say about you in rooms you're not in, that's raw market data on your weaknesses. Theodore Roosevelt kept a mental file of every serious enemy he'd made and what each one accused him of. Not to hold grudges, but because he believed your enemies were tracking your real vulnerabilities more carefully than your allies were. When you understand what your enemies are using against you, you can either eliminate the vulnerability or own it so completely that it stops being a weapon. A weakness that you openly acknowledge is no longer a secret that can be weaponized. This is why Stoic philosophers consistently advised men to regularly rehearse their worst criticisms in their own minds, not to internalize shame, but to diffuse the charge. The men who made you an enemy often reveal where your values actually conflict with your behavior. Epictetus said the obstacle is the way, not around suffering, through it. The same logic applies to enmity. When a man becomes your enemy, there is almost always a reason, and that reason almost always traces back to a moment where your actions contradicted your stated values. You said you were loyal, but you prioritized yourself. You said you were fair, but you played favorites. Your friend forgives this or doesn't notice it. Your enemy remembers it, sharpens it, and uses it. The philosopher Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Retire into yourself as much as you can." He meant, stop performing virtue and start examining whether you actually have it. Enmity is relational data. It tells you about two people simultaneously, the enemy and you. Strip away the emotional charge, the bitterness, the desire for vindication, and what remains is information about a moment where reality diverged from your self-concept. That divergence is exactly where personal development lives. Most men spend their whole lives avoiding that divergence. The men who face it are the ones who actually change. Here's what to take away. 1. Your enemies see you without the filter of loyalty, which means they often see you more accurately than the people who love you. 2. The specific attacks they level at you are almost always pointing at real structural weaknesses, the same ones holding you back professionally and personally. 3. The men throughout history who used their enemies as instruments of self-knowledge, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Marcus Aurelius, didn't do it because it felt good. They did it because it worked. The goal isn't to trust your enemies or befriend them. The goal is to extract the intelligence from the attack and leave the emotional poison behind. Your enemies are doing a kind of brutal, unwilling service. The only question is whether you're wise enough to accept it. If this resonated, if some part of you recognized a critic in your life who was accidentally right about something, subscribe. We drop one of these every Tuesday and Friday. No fluff, no motivation porn, just frameworks that actually hold up under pressure. Hit the bell so you don't miss it.